Hi, I'm John Stevenson. We're going to be looking at special observances in our continuing study of the book of Deuteronomy as we come to Deuteronomy chapters 14 and 15. As we came to the section of stipulations, back in chapter 5 we had the Ten Commandments, and then following that, once we came to chapter 12 and verse 6, we have the related commandments. Initially they were just an expansion of the first 3 or 4 commandments, but we come to do that again in chapter 12 verse 6. We had warnings about idolatry. Chapter 14 that we're coming to now, laws about worship and these observances. When we get to chapter 16, it'll be qualifications for leadership. Chapter 19, war and peace, and then chapters 21 and following will be laws of living. And these relate to those 10 commandments. Notice warnings about idolatry. That's the first 3 commandments are all about that. About I'm God and no other God, that you're only supposed to worship me, and no graven images, and don't take the name of your Lord in vain. Laws about worship, that relates to the Sabbath command, about the special observances, and so the Sabbath will be one of those observances, but there will be others as well. Under qualifications of leadership, that reminds us of parental authority and this whole authority idea, that you're to honor and respect your father and mother, but also others in authority as well. War and peace, that reminds me of the command against thou shalt not murder. Laws of living, there are those other laws, sexual purity and regarding not adultery, and thou shalt not steal, laws against theft. Don't bear false witness against each other. Keep your word, laws of pledges. And so what we have then is the 10 Commandments serving as the table of contents for all the rest of the laws. Chapter 14, verse 1. You are the sons of the Lord your God. You shall not cut yourselves, nor shave your forehead for the sake of the dead. Apparently this was maybe a practice that were done by other people groups. But you're special. You are a holy people to the Lord your God. For the Lord has chosen you to be a people for his own possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. And so you don't act like just the other pagans do. So they're called to be holy in verses 1 and 2. And one of the ways that comes out is you're to be holy in what you eat. And that's going to be verses 3 all the way to verse 20. And so we have dietary laws, first of all, regarding land animals. Animals that divide the hoof and chew the cud are allowed to be eaten. Other animals are not. And so just because it's a land animal doesn't mean it's open season. There's certain animals that don't divide the hoof, that don't chew the cud, like the pig and others. But that's the general rule. If they divide the hoof and chew the cud, then they're okay to be eaten. With regard to sea animals, fish that have fins and scales. So, there's certain animals that don't, certain sea animals that don't have fins or scales, like an octopus. Not supposed to be eating that. It's sort of a bottom dweller. Like a catfish. Sorry if you like catfish. That's actually not a clean animal. It doesn't have scales. It has fins, but no scales. And then when it comes to birds, there's a specific list that's forbidden. And some birds that were allowed, like chicken is okay, but other birds that were not, you weren't allowed to eat. Oftentimes it was, like a buzzard you couldn't eat. Birds that were feeders on other birds, things like that. And in that we could say, and I said here, no roadkill. In other words, if the animal was already dead, you couldn't just go, oh gee, it died somewhere, I'll cook that up. No, it was an animal that you had taken and you had killed, and you drained the blood from that, because that was something that was mentioned in the previous chapters. What you could eat and couldn't eat, you were not allowed to drink blood, and so you had to drain the blood from an animal. Chapter 14, verse 21, you shall not eat anything which dies of itself. Again, that's the roadkill idea. You may give it to the alien who's in your town, so that he may eat it, or you may sell it to a foreigner. For you are a holy people, the Lord your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. And this, was this a pagan practice about boiling a young goat in its mother's milk, or was it an unkind thing, sort of adding insult to injury, and for the purposes of ecology, it's okay if you kill the mother. I suppose the young goat too, but don't do them both. That's maybe adding insult to injury. So was it a pagan practice that's being forbidden, or was it an ecological practice, or maybe both at the same time? So there was a command, be holy, as I'm holy. Be holy in what you eat. That was verses 3 through 20. And now be holy in how you spend your money. That not just in what you eat, but also in how you spend your money. That is to be measured in how you are different and set apart from the other nations. Verse 22, you shall surely tithe. And that word tithe there, that's the word asher, just to take a tenth. You shall surely tenth all the produce from what you sow, which comes out of the field every year. They were to take that, you shall eat in the presence of the Lord your God at the place where he chooses to establish his name, the tithe of your grain. In other words, what are you doing that when you tenth it? Well, you're going to take that and you're going to have a meal before the Lord. He says, I want you to, now it's true, the rest of you have regular meals, but you're going to have a special meal, a celebratory meal, in the place where he chooses to establish his name, the tenth of your grain, your new wine, your oil, the firstborn of your herd and your flock, so that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. But notice, in that fear, you're giving that to him, but you get to participate in it. Now, verse 24, if the distance is so great for you that you're not able to bring the tithe, you're able to bring it, that thing that we've been talking about, since the place where the Lord your God chooses to set his name is too far away from you, because after all, the land's going to be sort of an extensive land when the Lord your God blesses you. If you can't do that, then you shall exchange it for money and bind the money in your hand and go to the place which the Lord your God chooses. So if maybe you can't bring, the oil and the wine, and that's just too much. So instead, you're going to use a different medium. Now, they didn't actually have coins at that time, or even paper money. What they had was gold and silver, and that's the term that's used here. It's been translated money, and that's probably not the best translation. But you were to exchange it for some sort of medium, either gold or silver, or some sort of, what was being used for currency in that day, and use that to go to the place where the Lord your God chooses. You may spend that medium, that gold or silver, for whatever your heart desires, for oxen or sheep or wine or strong drink or whatever your heart desires, and there you shall eat in the presence of the Lord your God and rejoice, you and your household. So this is not a burdensome thing, this is a delightful thing. Also, you shall not neglect the Levite who's in your town, for he has no portion or inheritance among you, so he's invited to the party as well. And then verse 28, at the end of every third year you shall bring out all the tithe of your produce in that year, and shall deposit it in your town. This is a different tenth. The Levite, because he has no portion or inheritance among you, and the alien, the orphan, and the widow who are in your town, they shall come and eat and be satisfied, in order that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hand which you're to do. So everyone is invited to the party. If you can't afford to come to the party, then that's okay, because others are going to invite you too. The alien, the orphan, the widow, the people that have nothing on their own, they're taken care of as well. And so notice we have these general instructions of the tithe, verses 22 through 27. Then there are special offerings every third year. That's what we just read in verses 28 29. And then finally we have the fact that debts are canceled on the sabbatical year. And that's going to be in chapter 15. So let's go there. Chapter 15, verse 1. At the end of every 7 years, you shall grant a remission of debts. You owed money and you weren't able to pay it. And that's not saying you're supposed to wait until the 7th year, but you're not able to pay it, and then it's almost as though you declared bankruptcy. It's just automatic. Verse 2, this is the matter of remission. This is the manner of remission. Every creditor shall release what he has loaned to his neighbor. He shall not exact of it his neighbor and his brother, because the Lord's remission has been proclaimed. And so everyone becomes debt-free. Verse 3, from a foreigner you may exact it. Notice it's the family that becomes debt-free. But your hand shall release whatever of yours is with your brother. You know, when you treat family different than you treat everyone else. And God is saying that you Israelites, you are family. And so treat each other as family. Verses 4 and 5, however, there will be no poor among you, since the Lord will surely bless you in the land which the Lord your God has given you as an inheritance to possess, if only you listen obediently to the voice of the Lord your God to observe carefully all this command which I am commanding you today. Now, we just read that there's not going to be any poor among you, and that brings up the question, why did Jesus say that you always have the poor with you if the law said there's not going to be any poor with you? Well, the answer is that the answer to poverty is in the pocket of your neighbor. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28 makes this clear, where Paul is telling these new Christians, people who formerly were Gentiles, but now they've come to the Lord, so they didn't really have the background of the law. But he tells them, he who steals must steal no longer, but rather he must labor. You work not just to perform your own needs, notice performing with his own hands what is good, so that he will have something to share with one who has need. One of the reasons we work isn't just to pay your bills, but it's also to take care of the one in need. So that if we are doing what we're supposed to be doing, the poor is taken care of. Back to Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 6, for the Lord your God will bless you as he has promised you, and you will lend to many nations, but you will not borrow. And you will rule over many nations, but they will not rule over you. You see, if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, not only will your needs be taken care of, but you'll be able to take care of others as well. And here even of those who were pagans, that the people of God become a blessing to the nations. Verse 7, if there is a poor man with you, one of your brothers, in any of your towns in your land, which the Lord your God has given you, you shall not harden your heart, nor close your hand from your poor brother, but you shall freely open your hand to him, and shall generously lend him sufficient for his need in whatever he lacks. Verse 9, beware that there's no base thought in your heart, saying, the seventh year, the year of remission is near, and therefore your eye is hostile. Now when it speaks about your eye is hostile, that's ra'a ra'anaka, that idea of an evil eye. Your eye is evil. But that's the literal Hebrew. But the translators have correctly translated the idea behind the idiom. The evil eye refers to the eye that is stingy. And your eye is hostile or stingy toward your brother. And you give him nothing, that he may cry to the Lord against you, and it will be a sin in you. Don't you be stingy. Don't let your eye be evil. Don't let your eye be stingy against other people. That same figure of speech its counterpart at least, is seen over in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 9, where it speaks of the one who has the good eye, the tov ayin. He who is generous, who has a good eye, will be blessed, for he gives some of his food to the poor. Likewise, in Proverbs chapter 23, verses 6 and 7, do not eat the bread of a selfish man, of a person who's got an evil eye, that same term that's used here, the ra'ayin, do not eat the bread of a selfish man or desire his delicacies, for as he thinks within himself, so he is. He says you eat and drink, but his heart is not with you. Don't be that selfish person, that person that has the evil eye, the stingy eye. That's what Jesus was talking about when he says in Matthew chapter 6, verse 22, and most people miss this, the eye of the lamp The eye is the lamp of the body. So then if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. Then if the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? And most people read this passage, which in context, Jesus has been speaking about rewards in heaven, and don't worry about what you have, and God is able to reward you, and don't lay up your treasures in heaven, and it's money, 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 all throughout chapter 6. And you come to this passage, and they think, well, Jesus has taken a detour, and he's not. He's talking about the same thing. He's talking about don't be stingy toward others. Don't have an evil eye toward others. Because if you do that, then that affects everything. Your stinginess affects all of your spiritual life. And so he says, you shall generously give to him, and your heart shall not be grieved. That's that word evil again. Your heart shall not be grieved when you give to him, because for this thing the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in all your undertakings. Don't have that evil, that stingy eye, that evil, that stingy heart. For the poor will never cease to be in the land. Remember that? You're always going to have to deal with the poor, and therefore I command you, saying, you shall freely open your hand to your brother, and your needy and the poor in the land. They're not to remain poor because you're supposed to take care of them. We're called to take care of the poor and the needy. And this is what Jesus was talking about when he says in Matthew 26, verse 11, you always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. And of course he was saying, look, it's important that you yes, you give to me, but that doesn't mean you forget the poor. That's always going to be with you. In fact, that's going to be a continuing reminder. And so verse 12, if your kinsman, a Hebrew man or woman, has sold you, then he shall serve you 6 years, but in the 7th year you'll set him free. Because again, that's every 7th year, all debts are removed. Verse 13, when you set him free, you shall not send him away empty-handed. It's not just that he's free, but he gets back pay. You shall furnish him liberally from your flock and from your threshing floor and from your wine vat. You shall give to him as the Lord God has blessed you. As you've been blessed, you're to be a blessing to others. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. In fact, remember when they redeemed them, the Lord put upon the hearts of the Egyptians, please get out of here. And they took great resources from the Egyptians. And so you're to do the same thing. Therefore I command you this today. Verse 16, it shall come about, if that slave that you're releasing, if he says to you, I will not go out from you, because he loves you and your household, since he fares well with you. Here's a situation in which his slavery is more on the order of being an employee, and he doesn't want to leave. Then, in that case, then you shall take an awl and pierce it through his ear into the door, and he shall be your servant forever. He's connecting himself with your house, with your door. Also, you shall do likewise to your maidservant, whether it's male or female, the one who does not want to go out. It's okay, they don't have to go out. They don't have to leave. And so, notice we had the general instructions of the tithe and the special offerings every 3rd year, and the debts in the sabbatical year. Next we have the laws of the firstborn, but then following that we have special feast days in chapter 16. So, chapter 15, verse 19, we're not to the special feast days yet. You shall consecrate to the Lord your God all the firstborn males that are born of your herd and of your flock. You shall not work with the firstborn of your herd, nor share the firstborn of your flock. That one's special. You and your household shall eat it every year before the Lord in the place which God chooses. The firstborn is set apart as a special offering, and notice it's an offering that you get to eat, because you're going to consecrate it. You're going to make it holy before the Lord. This is a special thing. Now, this brings up the question, who is God's firstborn today? Well, look in a mirror. Romans chapter 8, verse 29 says, "For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to become conformed to the image of his Son, so that he would be the firstborn among many brethren." Jesus is the firstborn, but he has many brethren, and so we get to partake of him and become that with him. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 22 and 23, "But you have come to Mount Zion, and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to myriads of angels, and to the general assembly and church of the firstborn, who are enrolled in heaven, and to God the judge of all, and to all the spirits of righteous made perfect." So chapter 15, verse 19 now, "You shall consecrate to the Lord your God all the firstborn males that are born of your herd and of your flock. You shall not work with the firstborn of your herd, nor shear the firstborn of your flock. You and your household shall eat it every year before the Lord your God in the place which the Lord chooses." And you're to eat it every year, but that brings up the question then, when do you do that? When every year do you do that? And for the answer to that, we're going to look at the next chapter, and we'll see that in chapter 16.